The first items I picked up were these two metal colanders. For this first DIY, I'm going to take one of those colanders and string some jute twine through it in 3 different places to balance it out and turn it into a plant hanger. I tied a loop at the top of my hanger with the jute and then wrapped the twine around it to give it a nice finished look. Then I placed a cocoa plant liner that I had picked up at Dollar Tree into the colander, and I placed a potted pothos plant into the liner that my sister had recently propagated and then gifted to me. Then I took a bag of Spanish moss from the Dollar Tree and placed it around the pot to kind of disguise the pot so you couldn't see it as much. The second colander wasn't in as good of shape, so I decided to spray paint this one for the next DIY. I spray painted the bottom of it in a glossy black and then the inside of it with a bronze spray paint. I'm going to make a fire bowl with this one. While I was waiting for the paint to dry, I dug through the snow and gathered up some stones from my backyard to use in this fire bowl. Or you could pick up some aquarium rocks or some small stones from Dollar Tree. I filled the bowl up with these pebbles and then placed a little chafing pot camp heater into the center of my bowl and placed a few big rocks around it to make it look like a mini fire pit. I brought it outside to test it out, and I was having trouble getting the wick to stay lit on my heater, but I think in the warmer months this will work a little better. You could also place a candle in the middle of your bowl and use it indoors as well. Next, I found this beautiful frame. It was just scuffed up a little bit, so I took this brown antiquing wax and just filled in the scuffs and the dings around the sides of the frame. And then for the picture, I really do like this painting. I think it's beautiful, but it's not the colors that I'm really going for right now. So I decided to pop out this picture and cut out a mat with a piece of Bristol board. Then I taped the mat on and then printed off a royalty-free public domain art print and taped that to the back of the mat. Then I popped the painting back onto the frame behind the new image just so I could keep it in place in case I decided to use it again. And for the final touches, I added some rub and buff around the edges of the frame where there was already some gold, but it was kind of scuffed off a bit. The next item I found was this beautiful Christmas tree star. This one was in perfect condition and I didn't need to do anything to it other than clean it up a bit. So I wiped it down and I'll pack it away and save it for decorating next Christmas. Next, I found these two wood bowls that were in pretty rough shape, but I really liked the look of the raw wood that was starting to show through. So I took some paint and varnish stripper. I used the Easy Strip brand, and I painted that on and then covered it in plastic wrap and let it sit for an hour. Then I took a stripping pad and just started wiping it off in a bucket of water. I did this process twice, and there was still quite a bit left behind, so then I took it outside and sanded off the rest of it. The inside of the bowl wouldn't have been very easy to sand, so I decided to paint on some white wax and then rubbed off any excess. And then right after that, before it dried, I painted on a layer of brown antiquing wax and kind of blended the two together. Then I was left with a really beautiful color, and it really masked the imperfections underneath it in the bowl. This wood bowl will make a really nice decorative piece that I can place all different things in it throughout the seasons, greenery, bowl filler. I'm really happy to have this piece. For the second smaller bowl, I stripped the varnish off in the same way that I did with the big bowl, and then sanded down any excess bits. I let that dry and then decided to turn this one into a mini dough bowl candle. First, you can spray your bowl down with some fire retardant just to make sure no accidents happen. Then I placed a wick in the center of my bowl and poured in some hot wax. I used 2 pencils to help keep my wick upright while that dried. After the wax dries, you can take a heat gun to the surface layer of the wax if you want to get out any of those divots and bumps in the wax. But that completed this candle. I think it turned out beautiful. lastly, I got this metal house from the bins at the Goodwill outlet. It had some lights in it that weren't working anymore, so first I removed those and then wiped it down. I wanted to give this house more of a neutral look, something I could use year-round. So I covered up the star holes at the top of the house with some duct tape underneath and then smoothed out some spackling on top of that. After it dried, I sanded it down just slightly. I wasn't worrying about being too careful with the sanding of this part because I knew I would be spraying on a textured spray, so it won't show up in the end. Then I took this outside and sprayed it with a white spray paint to give it a nice light base, and then took a textured stone spray paint and sprayed that on top after the white paint had dried. And that completed this cute little stone house. Next, I have this simple black picture frame that I wanted to distress and change the color of. I first started by painting it in gold and then took a crumpled up piece of paper and scuffed up the edges a bit before the paint dried to give it more of an aged antique feel. Then after that dried, I also took some brown antiquing wax and dabbed it on to also add to that aged feel and blend in some of the scuff marks that I had already made. Then I went through my little stash of printed out royalty-free art and picked one with a nice springy look to it and cut it to size and placed it inside the picture frame. Taking this decorative board and turning it into a beautiful high-end wood look piece using just paint. I started by priming the wood in white to completely block out the original design. Once that dried, I painted it with a coat of beige paint and then brushed on some brown antiquing wax to give it a beautiful faux wood finish. This one works really well as a decorative board. I'm using it in a cluster of decor leaning up against my backsplash on my kitchen counter. Next, I found this marble slab at the thrift store. I find that marble is not as easy to find when thrifting, so I was quite happy with this. The wood detail on the side of the board had a pretty rough, unfinished texture to it, and I wanted to tone down the contrast between the two shades of wood on it. So I painted on a couple layers of white wax and then wiped the excess right back off again with a paper towel. There wasn't much I needed to do to this one, it was already beautiful as it was. The next thrifted item I'm flipping today is this large framed piece of art. I really liked the art in the frame, so I only needed to wipe it down, but I did want to update the frame a bit. I started by painting this yellow-green matting around the artwork with a black acrylic paint. It had a velvet texture to it and was difficult at first to get the paint to completely cover it. So I watered my paint down quite a bit and then it went on much smoother. After that dried, I went in with some Rub and Buff in a European gold finish and used a rag to lightly buff it in the whole way around the frame. Next, I wanted to turn a thrifted book into a neutral piece of shelf decor. I started by choosing a book with a nice texture to the edges of the pages so that it would have a nice high-end aged look once it was completed. I took some cotton canvas fabric and glued it to the cover of the book with some tacky glue and hot glue. Just be sure to take your time and smooth out any wrinkles as you go. This simple, beautiful, finished book has a linen look to it, similar to some decorative books that I've seen at Pottery Barn. Lastly, I found this cute little garlic pot at Goodwill. I wanted to tone down the orange a bit and give it a more aged look, so I took my white wax and brushed it on and wiped it right back off again with a paper towel. I started by testing it on the bottom, and once I was sure I was happy with the look of it, I did about 3 coats around the whole pot. This makes a cute and functional little piece of kitchen decor. Today I'm going to be sharing some thrifted pieces with you, and I'm going to be using some Easy Off to transform them and change the look of them. The first piece I got from the thrift store was this wood stool for $5. I needed to make sure that all of the pieces were wood or natural materials to make this project work. I sprayed the stool with a good thick coat of Easy Off and let that sit for about half an hour. I bought this can of Easy Off about 2 years ago, and I've been planning on trying this project ever since then, and I'm just now getting to it, so my can doesn't spray very well after sitting for so long. also got this little wooden bowl that I'm going to try spraying with the Easy Off as well. And I got this nice wicker basket. I was trying to see if I could take the gray look away from this basket. So it was a bit of an experiment to see if the Easy Off would work for that. I did the same thing with these two pieces. I sprayed them down completely and let them soak for about half an hour. I was starting to run out of the Easy Off at this point, so these two didn't get as much on them. After the Easy Off had finished soaking in and doing its thing, stripping the varnish, I went in with a brush and scrubbed the best I could to try and get that layer of varnish off of the stool. After that, I hosed it down really well with the sharpest spray on my hose. This didn't get everything off, so I will be going in with a sander later to get the final bits. I did the same thing with the bowl and the basket. These two pieces were harder to get the finish off of, so I did pick up another can and go back in the next day and spray these two pieces down again and did the process all over again. had scrubbed and sprayed all of the pieces down, I let them sit in the sun to completely dry them off and let the sun bleach them. The Easy Off didn't do too much to this basket. It didn't change it as much as I had hoped, but it still did make a bit of a difference, and I am happy with it. This bowl was a little challenging to get the finish off of, so I did go in with a sanding block and then later on a power sander to get the final layer off of the bowl. And here's the stool after just one coat of the Easy Off and sitting in the sun for a day. I took my sanding block and used it to try to get that final layer of varnish off of the stool. A power sander would have worked better, but I didn't know where it was at this point. But I did find it right after I finished sanding this stool with the sanding block. The sanding block did work just fine, it just took a little longer. I really love the way the stool turned out. I like that the dings and some marks still show through to give it that antique look. For now, I'm leaving it the way it is, but later on, I think I will be adding a water-based top coat to it. The water-based will protect it without really changing the color of it. today I'm sharing some DIY home decor projects using scrap materials and dollar store supplies. Thank you so much for coming along. For the first project, I'm using some scrap wood to make a wood riser to use in my kitchen decor. I took a scrap 1x4 board and cut it down to about a foot in length, and then used a scrap 2x4 to make the legs for it. Then I sanded the pieces down and stained them. First I used a special walnut stain, and it wasn't as dark as I had hoped, so I then used a can of Jacobian stain, and that really added the rich depth that I was going for. wiping off the excess stain, I sprayed it down with some varnish, and that was it for this simple project. Next, I found this little planter at Value Village. I wanted to add a stone look to this planter. So to start, I took my flat white spray paint again and sprayed it on to prime the surface. It had a glossy finish to it, so I wanted to make sure that my stone texture would stick. After that dried, I used 2 colors of house paint to start adding the stone texture. The first paint I used was a mist tint that I picked up at the hardware store. I love to look in the mist tint section when I go in there because you can get some pretty cheap paint and save it for DIYs like this. This paint was called Sag Harbor Gray. I mixed in some baking soda with this paint and then started dabbing it on with a sponge. I let that dry and then used a can of white paint in the color White Dove. I mixed baking soda in with this paint as well as a bit of water. Then I dabbed it on right over top of the beige paint, making sure that there was some of that beige showing through to give it a layered stone look. this point, I just kept going back and forth between my two colors and blended them in places until I was happy with the way it looked. I'm so happy with the way this little planter came out, and I'm excited to use it in my decor. Next, I took a little thrifted picture and spray painted the whole thing in a brown paint. While that paint was still wet, I then took some plaster of Paris powder and rubbed it right into the wet paint. This immediately gave it a nice aged look and added texture as I was rubbing it in. I could have left it like that, but I wanted to add a bit more detail to it, so I brought it in and dabbed on some beige paint and a few dabs of gold as well. Today I'm giving a thrifted pair of lamps new life, and I'm going to give them a faux stone finish. I picked up this pair of lamps from Goodwill a couple months ago, and unfortunately one of them broke before I got around to making this DIY. So first I'm going to repair that lamp, and then I will add the faux stone finish. Thankfully, because the faux stone has a textured look to it, it'll help blend in the imperfections that this lamp now has. To repair it, I used dabs of E6000 glue for a permanent hold, and in between that I added hot glue for an immediate hold. After I fixed that lamp, I primed both of them because this is a very glossy finish, so I wanted my final stone texture to stick really well. For the stone look, I just used some leftover latex house paint, and I mixed in just a little bit of plaster of Paris until I was happy with the texture. I stirred that all together and then brushed on a pretty thick coat of the paint mixture. And I only ended up needing one coat of this to completely cover the lamp.
I was never the one to write up a song for just anyone. I was always the one to find myself lost in old conversations. Cause I've always been told that things will unfold if you keep on waiting. But then you came along and proved me all wrong. I was so mistaken. Cause you glue all the pieces back together. Yeah, you take all my wrongs and make them better. Yeah, you're making me wanna try forever. And I feel so free, oh my sweet baby.
Then, while the paint was still wet, I took some brown paint and sprayed on some flecks of paint just to add to that stone look.
Yeah, you take all my wrongs and make them better. Yeah, you're making me wanna try forever. And I feel so free, oh my sweet baby.